Stuart, welcome to this quarterly workshop. Nice to
Thank
see
you.
you. It's an interesting time, isn't it, for leasehold, because the government seem to have it in for the leasehold, and they brought out the leasehold reform bill, 2024, I think, didn't they? Or is it 20 or 24?
24.
What stage are we at the moment with it?
Well, it was introduced in November, and it sort of had a whirlwind adventure, and we've gone already right through the first stages of the House of Commons. So that's first reading, second reading, committee stage, report stage, third reading. And all Michael Gove's press conferences and articles seem to be very forceful that this is all coming in. And in the main, it's been thought that this is going to be actually become law by autumn of this year, which would have been very, very fast. And it's quite interesting to have watched a lot of the Parliament TV where leasehold is being discussed. And it's all been very pro leasehold, and sort of the fundamental question of, yes, but what's going to happen with regards to the compensation and the loss of freehold value hasn't really been discussed. It's been set aside, whereas that was always the issue, even since we started discussing leasehold reform about 7 years ago. So the bill is now before the House of Lords. It's had its first reading, second reading, I think, or at least some debates this Wednesday. So having this sort of update now, we're right in the middle of a little bit of a turmoil, because if we'd have had this meeting on Friday, I would have been saying the government appear hell-bent on bringing these reforms in, come what may. And that means loss of marriage value, removal of marriage value, reduction of ground rents within the valuation.
Do you want to explain what marriage value is to people, please, Stuart?
I've possibly done that about
Yeah, I know.
500,000 times in my life over the phone to everybody, and it's still quite difficult to grasp. But basically, if you've got a short lease flat, say you've got 50 years, and it's worth £100,000 because of its short lease, and it's going to be worth 200,000 with a long lease, okay? But the freeholder has got quite a big interest in that, hasn't he? Because in 50 years, he gets his £200,000 flat back. Well, not his, but he gets the flat technically back. So his interest in this is worth something. So let's say his interest is worth 50 and the leaseholder's value is worth 50. That makes 100,000 total of the present interests. But after the lease extension has happened, the freeholder's got nil value, but the leaseholder's got £200,000 worth of value. So by marrying these two interests of the freeholder's interest, which is worth 50,000, and the leaseholder's interest, which is worth 50,000, they've married those interests together. Suddenly you have a long lease flat, completely saleable at 200,000. Marriage value is that 100,000. And the current law says each party benefits from half of that. So the leaseholder, to get a lease extension, would have to give 50,000 to the freeholder for his present interest and half the marriage of 50,000. So the leaseholder has to give the freeholder 100,000, but they had an interest which was worth only 50. They've paid out 100. Now they've got a flat worth 200. So it's the uplift in value of the asset by fusing the two present interests. But in this example, this bill says that marriage value no longer exists, or you won't be entitled to it. So instead of this example costing the leaseholder 100, it would only cost them 50. But of course, the landlord would lose out on that £50,000. It's not quite as simple as that, but that's a rough gauge, a rough idea.
But of real importance to many freeholders, and especially some businesses have built their entire business on marriage values.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, for many freeholder clients whose their father or even their grandfather built the block in the 30s or the 50s. It's been kept in their family and in trust, or people have built up these businesses for management and the lease extension premiums over 30 or 40 years. Of course, this whole problem about leasehold reform has been started by a few rogue freeholders, and there are those people. And really, this whole leasehold basis was started to be challenged where houses were built in northeast of England on a leasehold basis for no real reason. And that's really the problem, because those ones had really penal ground rents, like 250 doubling every 5 years or 250 doubling every 10 years for no reason. But that's more of a mis-selling issue. Although you do get some aggressive ground rent landlords generally, 95% of ground rent landlords are perfectly straightforward, perfectly reasonable people, happy to grant lease extensions, and there are no issues. But it's this sort of bad element, and that's why leasehold reform was first talked about many years ago, to get rid of that. So we're at the stage of the House of Lords, and as I say, on Wednesday they're due to discuss it. But what's happened, as I say, if you had this on Friday, we would have thought that it was definitely all going through. But suddenly, over the weekend, we've had articles from the Sunday Times and from other major papers, publications. So the Times headline is "Leasehold Dream Over as Gove Plan Quietly Crumbles." And they're saying Michael Gove is fighting to salvage his flagship reforms after a major proposal was quietly axed by the Treasury in Downing Street. And this is about really the transfer of wealth, that if you were to remove that marriage value, and also remember, they've also been talking about reducing ground rents to nil. So not sure how that was ever going to get through if you've got a legal contract on millions of leases, how suddenly you can just break that legal contract. And remember, that not all ground rent payments are penal. Some are still £100 fixed, some are 250 doubling every 25 years. Not really aggressive ground rents as we would call them, but they were talking about getting rid of these. And sort of this is not, initially it was thought, the headlines were that they were going to remove it so you didn't have to pay it, but actually in the act, in the bill, it's proposed to cap them for the purpose of valuation only. So you may have a ground rent going up aggressively, but when you come to ask for your lease extension, let's say your ground rent's £125 and it's going up to £1,000 in 10 years' time, the valuation would be that you would cap the ground rent that you were going to value to 0.1% of the value of the flat. So if you had a £300,000 flat, you may be paying £100 now and £1,000 in your contract in 10 years' time, but actually the valuation would be capped at £300. So the freeholder would only be compensated for that income. So he would still be losing out, but that was thought as this is the initial idea of how to partly reduce the compensation, or not part,
the loss of income.
Yeah, to reduce the loss to the freeholder. But the problem is that when we do leasehold valuations for buying freeholds or buying lease extensions, we tend to use certain rates which we get from the market and through market evidence. But the government were talking about prescribing those, setting those in stone. So really, to remove the need for any valuers, you just go onto a computer calculation spreadsheet on the internet and you go put the figures in that you know, And it would be fairly easy to do, because if somebody knew their flat was worth about 300, their ground rent's capped at 300, they knew their flat was worth 300, put that in on as well, and that would give you a figure, and that would be it. But of course, if they prescribe the rates lower, the premium becomes higher on that part of the valuation. But they haven't told us what the rates are going to be or how it's going to be set. They've told us it will be set every 10 years, but it's like, well, on what basis? And that's so critical to trying to establish what the loss will be. Because if the loss was 5%, 10%, possibly landlords would have accepted it. But from what their headline is, no marriage value, capped at 0.1%, you're looking at massive losses on each property, maybe, you know, especially with short leases. So we just don't know what the loss is going to be. Although they did have an impact assessment done in November, and that, I don't know quite what the basis. I can't remember exactly. It's about 40 pages long, this impact assessment. It was about 30 billion of loss to freeholders, and that's before they actually knew what the prescribed rates were going to be. So they were just guessing a little bit. They made some assumptions, but it's a pretty substantial loss, or potentially a substantial loss. So that's where we've got to at the moment. There are some good things about the Act, and there are some easy things to bring in. We might find that the valuation issues are not brought in because there's going to be this argument over loss, which potentially would see a human rights challenge. But there are easy things to be done. And some of the other interesting proposals are that the 2-year qualification would be omitted. So the current law is that you own a flat. If you haven't owned it for 2 years, you've no right to a lease extension. So this causes major problems, especially when you've got a 60-year lease. Let's say you want to sell your flat. The complication now is that if I've owned my flat for 2 years, but it's only got a 60-year lease remaining, and I want to sell, I have to serve a notice, Section 42 notice on the landlord, and assign the benefit of that notice to the buyer, and then they do not have to wait for 2 years. However, lawyers get that notice wrong. The lawyer acting for the buyer doesn't realise it's wrong. The buyer ends up with a defective notice, can't serve a notice for 2 years, and yet have based their purchase offer on the assumption that they're going to acquire an extended lease within a few months.
Go off on a slight sidetrack there, which is why we always say to people, make sure, particularly when you're buying and selling, you employ someone that's doing the solicitor work, that they actually understand lettings and leasehold, etc. Because unfortunately, a lot of general purpose solicitors don't understand, and
Absolutely,
problems arise.
I mean, even this week, I've had questions from a lawyer, sort of very basic questions about the law, and that person there is going to, they're going to serve the notice, are they? And so many mistakes happen in these notices, which they're then rendered void. So anyway, so that 2-year qualification, to get rid of that, make life so much easier. They're also talking about a 990-year term for lease extensions. I don't know why they've come up with that one. It doesn't make any difference to the valuation, really, but it stops somebody, you know, a lot of people in the past, not so much now, but in the past, people would have accepted an extra 30 years on their lease. And then suddenly, you know, 20 years has gone and the next buyer has to get a lease extension. You know, when I first started, you used to sell a 60-year lease in the 70s. It's just a bit cheaper. People bought it. You could still get a mortgage on it. And then as time went on and this act was introduced, slowly people started to realize that this was an issue to lenders. And then lenders started not to want to lend on 70-year leases, some not even on 80-year leases. And so what's happened is the length of the lease has become so much more important to people that we even have people with 105-year leases extending. Now I always say, why do you want to do that? They say, well, it's going to be cheaper now and I'd like to get it sorted out. Fair enough. You know, good answer. So people are very much more conscious of longer term. So anyway, a 90-year term, then you never have to redo it, or your descendants don't have to do it. Another one is that if you serve a notice, you go through the process, and then your lawyer or you miss the deadline, or you can't raise the money, you're actually barred from applying for another lease extension for 12 months. So if you're deemed to have withdrawn, so I've had this recently again, serve a notice, agreed a premium, sorted out all the terms, flat owner waiting for some money to come through, something gets sidetracked, lawyer tells him he must complete by that day, or the lawyer misses the date. Somehow the date is missed. You're then not allowed to apply for another lease extension for 12 months. So it's mad, totally unfair. So that will be omitted as well. Also, we get not so many in the south, but we do a lot of valuation work in London. There's a lot of intermediate leases. So you can have, block of 10 flats, you can have a head lease or intermediate lease over all of those flats or over some of them before you get to the freehold title above it. And that makes the valuation and the negotiations and the costs very expensive. And so they've come up with a way to revise that and make it easier, which I won't bore you with the detail, but that's a good point. The other thing is that they're in this proposed bill is that they've got rid of costs, in terms of that the leaseholder does not have to pay all of the landlord's costs, which I must say I think is a little bit odd, because it's a little bit like a compulsory purchase, isn't it? That if the government want your house to put in a new road, they have to give you market value. They have to compensate you for all your loss and all your fees to put you in the same position as if you were before they compulsorily purchased it. And lease extensions, they're a bit like that, aren't they? The freeholder doesn't want to get rid of his investment, but the law says, well, you have to, but you're going to be compensated fairly. And so you might have something where the premium's only £3,000, but the landlord's costs might be £1,000. I mean, even for example, the council. Okay, we do a lot of valuation work for people extending for leaseholders in Brighton and Ada, and the council's basic standard costs are £1,500 plus VAT, but the premiums are quite low. £3,000–4,000, because they're all long leases at the moment. So it's quite a chunk. So if you're a landlord, even the council, you're getting a £3,000 premium, but you can't recover your costs, and your costs are £1,500. So it's a way of, however, capping or preventing unreasonable costs, which again, a lot of the larger landlords' costs are really out of order sometimes. But you can still challenge them at the moment. So there are some other amendments which are all very reasonable to improve the whole process. So one would hope that those things might still come in if this bill does survive at all, which we don't know. As I say, on Friday I would have told you they're hell bent on bringing it through this year, and it looks, we haven't heard anything. We haven't heard any reasons why it's not going to be brought in.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the whole thing's a bit, well, legislation's up in the air all in all, isn't it? But just to mention also that as well as the things that Stuart's talking about, the bill also covers right to manage and the Building Safety Act. So again, whether or not these get through or whether they're brought through as separate things, we wait to see. But nobody knows. I mean, you willing to put your money on it, Stuart? Are you that brave?
From this publicity over the weekend, this is something that we've always suspected. We've always had, well, how are freeholders going to be compensated? How is it going to work if you're going to change it? Please tell us, government, what is the basis, so that we could look at individual cases and say to freeholders, you're actually going to lose this amount of asset value in your portfolio when this act is brought in. We can't tell what that is, but we always said it. We said, well, how is the Cadogan estate in London? You've got a £10 million flat, and it's got 10 years to go.
Yeah.
How are you going to wipe out the marriage value? Because what's going to happen is that the landlord's value of getting back this £10 million flat in 10 years, you're going to be giving it to the leaseholder, because his value is going to go up, isn't it?
Yeah.
His value is going to go up massively, because now, instead of it costing him 5 million to extend his lease, it's only going to cost him 1. So he's going to make a profit. So you're just giving this money from one asset class to another, and that's against human rights. They can't. How would you do it? So I think this is the first pro freeholder publicity that we've seen since the introduction of the Act. Another headline over the weekend is Michael Gove's Stalinist leasehold reforms could deprive the Treasury of £1 billion. So I'm sounding very much like freeholders man, and I'm not. But it still seems to me a big injustice. But also, it is an injustice. Let's just balance that with leaseholders, because leaseholders have been very hard done by. There are very aggressive freeholders. There are leaseholders who have been cajoled into entering into penal ground rent clauses. Of course, they had legal advice, and their lawyer didn't explain it to them properly or didn't understand the ramifications of it. Well, that's the lawyer's problem, I'm afraid. If we've got any lawyers watching, they may say something else, but I think it's a huge problem. I mean, like in any professional industry, you've got to give good advice. And I think many leaseholders have entered into agreements and lease renewals or lease extensions where they haven't had the right advice. You can get out of them. You can get out of leases. You can reduce your ground rents. We've got a perfectly workable act. The 93 Act's been in for 30 years. It works fine. It costs the leaseholder money, sure, but it compensates the freeholder. But as I say, the leaseholders, there are, especially in the houses with very penal ground rents, that's been the problem. But that is a mis-selling. And the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority, have done a lot of good work and have actually got a lot of the major house builders who granted these leases to give people lease extensions at I'm not sure nil cost, but they've agreed to not charge them. So those issues of that mis-selling has been addressed by the CMA, and we've had another batch of major house builders who have agreed not to charge for getting rid of these ground rents.
Yeah,
that's kind of a different pocket.
We've got some questions coming in. By the way, if you want to ask questions to anybody, just go to the chat box. You may have to move your mouse to get the chat box up. If you move your mouse, you'll see the chat box at the bottom, sort of towards the left-hand side. So just type a message. One possible offset for freeholders and managing agents would have been to offer some form of increase in the current 250 cap on an S20 requirement, Section 20 requirement. Any comments on that one?
One possible offset for freeholders and managing agents would have been to offer some form of increase in the current 250 cap on the Section 20. Are you talking about what for works? Section 20, 87 Act, is that?
I don't know, Rodney, do you want to come on and explain what you meant by that? I don't know I can't see you at the moment, but if you want to unmute and just come in and explain that one.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on that another one while we wait. Peggy said the Mortgage Lenders Handbook has different criteria for different lenders. Yes, that's absolutely true. Different lenders will lend at 70 years with no problem. It was just that I remember years ago, there was a press release or press article of Barclays, returning or refusing to lend on a 250 pound a year ground rent, which doubled every 25 years. So that was like, what are they doing? This has been in for the last 25 years. What's the problem? They clearly don't understand it. So, but Peggy's quite right. Different lenders, you can hunt round, and different lenders do have different criteria, but it's still reduced. If you've got a flat with a penal ground rent, you're still going to have a problem. I mean, because many are to RPI, which one stage RPI increases were thought to be okay, and then of course with the massive inflation that we've had recently, RPI is a nightmare because the RPI has gone up so much, and so some building societies don't like an RPI increase now. So it's sort of a changed landscape.
Okay, and I'll come on to you in a moment, Rodney, if I can. See you unmuted. Thank you. And Peggy's got a follow up. Does the present bill address this or not?
Well, the present bill is to allow all leases on a lease extension to be extended to 990 years. So they're thinking that when all these existing leaseholders have been through that, we then have we don't have an issue. So how long is acceptable for a residual lease? Well, that's really up to the lender. I mean, you can sell a leasehold flat with any length lease.
Yeah.
Full stop. I mean, one's just sold in London with a 12-month term remaining.
Really?
But they'd served the Section 42 notice. The seller had served it and was assigning the benefit of that notice, so the buyer could come in and immediately extend. But what a fag, because basically the freeholder is going to get a £300,000 flat back in 12 months.
Yeah.
So isn't the premium going to be about 300,000, give
Yeah.
or take? I mean, there are some technical arguments on that. But yes, you can sell anything, and of course, if a buyer of a short lease flat knows what it's going to cost them in a lease extension premium, they'll take a view, especially if this law allows them to extend it straight away. So somebody's going to look at a £500,000 flat, it's at auction at 300 with a short lease. Somebody's going to know they can extend that for 95,000 plus their costs, and they can do the maths and bid on it accordingly. And that will improve the market for short lease flats if we just get rid of this 2-year rule.
Yeah. Okay. Rodney, do you want to come on and explain your question?
I'm just basically saying, this is a typical example of the government putting a fixed number out there. To best of my knowledge, we've had this cap for 25 plus years, and now it's almost penalising leaseholders as much as it's keeping managing agents and freeholders in check. In that, £250 per flat, well, that's like one day's labour for most contractors. So it creates a lot of administration, and the process takes at least 3 months to grind its way through. So it means that urgent works are often put back and additional costs are incurred.
Yeah, you're talking about a 250 cap on having to serve a Section 20 notice on build works. That's what you're talking about. Yes. Yeah, I agree. It's why can't that be increased? Because it means really that Section 20 needs to be served for virtually everything you do. So, but I'm not an expert in management issues. I'm afraid I'm just a valuer. But yeah, I totally agree with you that 250 cap is far too low. Far too low.
Don't believe him when he says he's just a valuer. He knows everything there is to know about leases. We've had a question earlier on about HMOs, etc. I'll pick that up when we've finished talking about leases, if we can, rather than muddy the waters. So I mean, if you were the minister, what would you do to improve the leasehold system now? I've just promoted you.
Me? Oh, well, I think all of these elements that I've just gone through with the 2-year rule, the 12-month withdrawal problem, the 990 term, the intermediate lease issues, all of those things are completely sensible and will speed up and ease the lease extension process. We have major issues on leasehold houses. These are now I'm talking about older leasehold houses, because many houses were sold on a leasehold basis in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And the legislation is really incredibly complicated. Just to work out which base of valuation I have to use probably takes 45 minutes a case. You need to see if you can find the rateable value. You need to find if that's the original lease. You need to work out what the original rent was. And you need to really be sure that you're following either Section 9.1 or Section 9.1A. It's really unnecessarily complicated. So these things that get rid of these complications can only be a good thing. But if these headlines are to be believed, and they're sort of genuinely talking about the implications of loss to freeholders, then at this stage today, I think possibly we won't see the removal of marriage value, and we possibly won't even see prescription. We won't see anything come in with regards to an actual revised valuation basis. We might just see the mechanics of making the law easier for that first stage. In any event, they were talking about trying to get this bill through, because obviously it's a vote winner for the Conservatives, 5 million leaseholders. They're thinking that they're going to get those 5 million votes. And they need to get it done pretty quickly. But how are they going to do that now? With this sort of flare up in the publicity, I just can't see it happening. But what they could do is to stick to partly their promise. They could make it a little bit easier and tidy up some of this legislation. I mean, this bill, when it went before government when it was commenced in November, it's had about 200 amendments. So it's complicated, to say the least.
And nothing like the original bill.
Say again?
And nothing like the original bill.
Yeah.
So we've I think you've just answered this question, actually. What would you advise clients who have a short lease, less than 80 years, extend the lease and pay the marriage value, or wait for the reform?
Yeah, well, really recently we've been saying to all our clients, leaseholder clients, we've been saying, well, this is what it's going to cost you today under the current legislation. You can choose to wait, but we don't know when this is going to come in. But they're talking about the first stage of law coming in this year. But even when they bring in the first stage of the law, we are then being told that actually the rates, the prescribed rates, would be dealt with in secondary legislation. So I just don't know how that would work, because if you don't know what the prescribed rates are, how can you do the valuation? So I think the trouble with when you have a less than 80 years is that 2 years can make quite a difference to the premium on the current valuation basis. So if you're slipping from 68 to 66 years and the market's going up, it's going to be several £1,000s more expensive in a couple of years to extend your lease. So if you have to sell it, you've got to, you might as well do it now and bite the bullet. But it's a difficult one. We're just saying we don't know what the premium is going to be in the future. We can't give you any advice. All we can say is what you can do now, what the value is now.
And
can I just pick up on this second point from Paul?
Labour? I was going to say, what would Labour do?
Labour have actually said, they've announced last week, Labour Party have announced that they will abolish leasehold within 100 days.
Along with everything else they're going to do in the 100 days.
So
abolish it completely. They'd have all sorts of legal challenges, wouldn't they?
One would have expected so. But yes, that's what their headline is.
Right.
They'll run into the same problems as we have at the moment.
Yeah. Right, you've got a few more questions coming in. I'll read them out so people, in case people can't see them. the government could differentiate between owner occupiers and properties that are landlords owned via a visa of by a marriage value. So in other words, talk about one rule for owner occupiers and another rule for landlords.
Yeah, they could do. It would still be a loss. I think we'd still have the same problems, wouldn't we? We'd still have the issue of compensation and loss, but it's something that they could do. But I think they probably won't differentiate between them. Originally in the Act, you had to be an owner-occupier for enfranchisement, but that was very shortly changed so that even investors in blocks of flats could participate in purchasing the freehold.
Yeah, and someone's made the comment that Barry Gardner stated on X, Twitter, that they would abolish leaseholds completely. So,
yes, and in fact, Barry Gardner, we're talking about the MP there, I suppose. Yes, he's been very outspoken in the on Parliament TV at the committee stages. Yes, he's completely pro abolishing leasehold. Yeah. Absolutely, he is. He's and he you know he's a clever bunny as well. He knows his, he really knows his stuff. But exactly that's what but in a way they're trying to, abolish leasehold means a complete new system. And this Act doesn't abolish leasehold, this just varies it, because the complete leasehold, abolishment of leasehold is, you've got to have another system in place, which will be common hold.
Well, I just got one of the comments made as common hold, but how many people have got common hold? Is it into double figures yet?
I don't think so, no.
It's just crazy, isn't it? So.
It's just something that people don't understand, and it's never taken off.
It was a Tony Blair thing, wasn't it?
I believe so, yes. I think they use that in Australia, a very similar system.
Right.
But yeah, you have to have a workable alternative, don't you?
Yes.
And they haven't got one, otherwise they'd be using it now.
Yeah. We've got someone there who said last check was 20 schemes.
Oh, 20 schemes, thank you.
Oh, right. So we have got into double figures.
Yeah.
But only just.
Yeah.
And have you seen a reduction in leasehold extensions, etc.? I mean, have you had to put the begging bowl out yet?
Not yet, but we've got lots of other things to do. But yeah, we've certainly seen a reduction in lease extension claims coming through while this publicity has gathered since November. So definitely, of course, people still need to sell, people still need to remortgage. So most of the lease extension work, the valuation work, and the cases that we're settling now are for people in a sale position. They've got no choice; they have to extend their lease. But yes, we've seen a reduction. But you see, what if they had have bought in? If it had become law, everything would then turn to statutory claims. Yeah. So even though there might not be such an influential role for valuers, there would have been thousands and thousands more statutory claims, and people would have needed some form of guidance through, because there'll still be some valuation arguments, I'm sure. But now it looks as though they won't reduce marriage value, or maybe won't prescribe rates. Then those are the same arguments are back in place.
Yeah, yeah. So, in answer to the question, what should you do? We don't know. Because I tend to agree with you. I really can't see how Labour can just abolish leasehold in 100 days. Surely the solicitors or their legal teams have gone, you can't do that.
That's what they said.
Well, there you go. Anyway, all right, I will go on to this question about HMO in a moment, but I just want to make sure we've wrapped up on leaseholds. Anyone got any more? Hang on, let's just go down. No more for any more. So, well, thank you so much for that, Stuart. It was great. So,
welcome.
Just confusion all round. And let me just go on to this question about HMOs, etc. The question is, in case for those who might not be able to read it, is can you comment on the effect of the new legislation on HMO student lets? yes, I can, in as much as where this has happened in Scotland, it's just driven a horse and coach through the student model, absolutely driven out the student landlords. It's forcing tenants to go to other kinds of so the blocks put up by institutions, etc., which tend to be an awful lot more expensive. So the tenants, as is often the case with legislation, are losing out on this. What's the situation in effect of lobbying by the association, universities, etc., etc.? Well, basically, we just continue to lobby. I mean, with the renters reform bill, it's got quite a lot in there which is quite reasonable, some of which we can live with, and then a small part of it which is really, really bad. And unfortunately, everybody's been really concentrating on the really, really bad. And the worry that we've got, and a lot of Conservative MPs have said this, is that if it doesn't go through as it stands at the moment or in an amended form, again, that they've said, the Labour has said that they will actually deal with Section 21 within the first week, not even 100 days. They'll deal with the Section 21 question within, which they could do. They could actually deal with this as a statutory instrument. So, what you should be doing, we've said this several times before, you need to be writing to your MP to raise your concerns about the Renters Reform Bill and how it will affect you, particularly if you're a student landlord. We intentionally do not offer a template letter because we've found in the past where MPs get lots of letters which are clearly the same, they just ignore them. So, we always stress to you, please do write to your MP, but, and couch it in your own terms. Anyway, so let's just scroll back down to the bottom. No, I've got no more questions. So, Stuart, thank you so much for your time on this. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Peter.
We have recorded this. We will edit it and we'll put it out to people who have joined here if you want to see it. And I don't have your email address. Email info@ihouse.uk. If I was very, very clever, I would have got the date of the next quarterly meeting up, but I haven't. So anyway, it will be put up very soon. I can't find it, so if anybody knows, tell me. It's in a quarter's time, roughly. So we don't have a subject for the next quarterly workshop. If anybody have got anything you really want to talk about, then please let us know and we'll arrange it. We tend to leave it till closer to the time because things change. And what's a hot topic today might not be a hot topic in 3 months' time, and vice versa. So please do let us know if there's anything you want to know, and we'll see how we can deal with it. Apart from that, we'll see you in 3 months' time. Members, you'll get the e-news tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. If you're not getting it, please let me know. Stuart, thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter.
You and I. Okay, and bye for everyone that's joined us.
Thank you.